I think I've known Larry for quite a long time because we were always so close to the Kendalls. The Hulickys and the Kendalls really worked together. Larry, I'm going to guess on some of this stuff and then you're going to correct me. You've been a long-time reader because your father, Clarence Bowman, was involved in the early days. You found your way to your Rancher Foundation and were part of the forum in the later, I think the later days. Is that correct as well?
That's right.
And you were a librarian, retired, which makes you very fastidious about everything. And you know, you can depend on Larry to come back and give you a whole long note if you ask him a question about what happened. He has I think you have a brain that's pretty much photographic in a lot of ways. He remembers a lot of the history that some of us have lost. Longtime reader, Arizona has a society, and you are a member of it. Yep. I don't remember the name. So,
Grand Canyon Urantia Book Society.
Grand Canyon Urantia Book Society.
We do not meet in the Grand Canyon, as one person wondered when she called.
Name. And so if you'd like to tell them anything else about yourself, I just know you're a great person.
Oh. Well done. Well, thank you, Marilyn.
You're welcome.
Let's see, I think Emily earlier said it was so wonderful of me to come out here from, oh, can somebody hand me my glass of water there? Thanks. Come out here from Arizona to this. It's really a beautiful day out here. I'm really loving the weather. It was 20, according to my phone, it was 25 this morning when I got up, but that's not bad. But yesterday morning at the Phoenix airport, I was having breakfast, sitting at the counter, and there was a woman sitting next to me. She was on her way back to Milwaukee, and then around the corner of the counter were two guys from Oklahoma City, and they had all checked out of their hotels. The woman from the Fairmount Princess Hotel in Scottsdale, which is where the Phoenix Open is going on right now. And the two guys were checking out from the Camelback Inn, which dates from the 1930s. Both those hotels are top-rated Phoenix area resorts. And the two guys said their room was going up to about $3,000 a night because, as you may know, the Super Bowl is in town tomorrow, and of course the Phoenix Open, and the gal said that too. So here I am missing all the crowded restaurants in Scottsdale and taking in this cold weather, and I really don't mind it. I'm enjoying it. So anyway, I really enjoyed seeing that video again. I think I've seen it before. I saw my dad show up a few times, 2 or 3 times in the video, and my brother-in-law, Tom Kendall, who he was a longtime trustee on the Rancher Foundation. He was president of it for 10 years from, I think, let me see,
72, 73.
Yeah, well, actually, he was removed as president at the time of the controversy over the Vern Grimsley messages. So that was 84, I think, something like that. So anyway, and then you saw Carolyn Kendall's name in the credits for the video, and that was my sister. I didn't see my mom in the video, but during the break, there were a bunch of slides showing, and I saw her pop up in that once or twice. I didn't see myself in any of those videos, but that's okay. If somebody says I'm the Ancient of Days here, and the membership, the membership book is going around, and some of you noticed that my signature is in there. I was a charter member of the First Rancher Society, so I'm the only person here today who was there at the installation of the First Ranchers Society, so yay for me. Yeah, I'll try to be a little more. But anyway, the title of my talk is The Mystique of February 11th. And I think you're already hearing some allusions to that date. I've mentioned it to a few people. Actually, I had breakfast, was it a couple of weeks ago with, or last month, I guess, with a longtime reader, and I mentioned that, and he had no idea what I was talking about. And so I will kind of explain that. The date does show up a few times. As a matter of fact, I had 5 dates picked out, but I'm going to mention another date because Marion Hughes raised a question about something, and Barbara validated it. So I'll work that in the appropriate place. But the first date, of course, is February 11th, 1923, 100 years ago today. And that was the first meeting of the forum. And the only people that I really know of who were there at the meeting, of course, were the Sadlers and the Kellogg's, and I guess Emma Christensen. We don't know when the Kulicki started attending. I did know the oldest Kulickis. That would be David's grandfather, Edmund, I guess his name was. I think we sort of knew him as Pop Kulicki. But we do have one descendant of one of those, 2 of those attendees here, and this the gentleman right here, another Dr. Sadler. He doesn't want me to introduce him that way, but I'm speaking, of course, of Thomas R. Sadler, PhD, professor of economics at Western Illinois University, 4th generation reader. And I became acquainted last night, and I pointed out to him by the buffet there, said I was standing there, and I met your mom was standing at the corner of the buffet, and somebody, I think it was Leon Sadler, that's your grandmother, said, Larry, this is Judy Sadler, Chuck's wife. So I don't know when that happened, but I did find in my diary, I remembered that Tom's father, Chuck, he was a year younger than I. I never really knew him very well because he did not attend the forum meetings. But I did remember that he did give a presentation, one Jesus birthday celebration here in this room, and I was able to find it in my diary. It was August 21st, 1963. Well, Tom told me last night that Chuck and Judy were married by then. So, it was very interesting about that program because it was Chuck Sadler and then his mom, Leon Sadler, and then the original Dr. Sadler, it would be Dr. William S. Sadler. So, and by the way, Chuck Sadler was also a Dr. Sadler because he was also a PhD in history, also taught at Western Illinois University. So anyway, my dad, Clarence Bowman, first started attending on November 11th, 1963. John Hales' grandparents started sometime in 1924. I know that Clyde Waddell started on September 28th, 1924. So what was going on in the, oops, I'm gonna put this here, I guess. What was going on in the forum for a while there? It was primarily talking about, well, here's some of the topics that my dad mentions. For several months there, or weeks there, they talked about primary instincts and emotions of man. And then in January of 24, got into discussions on heredity and genetics. February 3rd, sex determined by number of chromosomes. February 10th, Darwinism and variations, etc., in heredity and environment. February 17th, no subject mentioned, but Dad saw pretty chestnut blonde. That's very important. February 24th is Mendeleism. I think you know that study about genetic traits or hereditary traits, really. In March, they got into eugenics and so forth. On March 30th, talked with the pretty young woman with blue eyes and black hair. April 13th was interesting enough, in 1924 was the last meeting for the season, and he became acquainted with Miss Rowe, R-O-W-E, as Lucy Rowe. So she's mentioned a few more times, and somewhere in his diary, he says, a year from now, I expect to be engaged to Lucy Rowe. And well, you'll find out what happened there. So anyway, so this was the size of Dad's diaries in the 1920s and well into the 30s. Really small, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now this is his 1924 diary.
Treasure.
So I was interested in hearing Marilyn say what happened on December 7th, because in 24, because Dad wasn't at that meeting, but she said that's when Doctor, I guess, talked about his sleeping subject, his longtime sleeping subject, and asked for questions. Well, I always thought, see what happened on December 14th. Dad's diary says, wonderful revelations from Machiavellia, or ABC, were read by the doctor. So, see, now Dad was hearing these names, just hearing them without seeing them in print. So I guess Machiavellia sounded like Machiavellia to him. And so that is when, oh, okay. So I think one of those days, either December 7th or December 14th, is the next important February 11th, and that would be the preceding February 11th, 1924. Machiavellia, Melchizedek, and ABC the first tell the Contact Commission they should make use of the Sunday afternoon meetings and have the participants ask some serious questions, you know, about God, the universe, life after death, and other such matters. And so it's not clear to me now exactly when Doctor first mentioned that specific date to the forum. It must have been either, I assumed it was December 14th, but it might have been the week before, which Dad missed. Anyway, so that's your second appearance of February 11th. But it doesn't show up in my Dad's diary for several more months. Actually, let's see here. Okay, we're into 1925, and as Marilyn said, January 11th is when I guess the first paper came through. Dad writes in his diary accounts of supervisors of Series 606 and of sovereign visitors of the universe of Nebulon. Another name that he didn't quite get right. Marilyn said that the title of that paper was Universal Godhead. The early papers did have different names from what we know them of now, because over the years, they were expanded into additional papers, and so that's how you find different things. But the following January 18th, Doctor gave us the answers of 181 questions. That's what I show in my notes. Answered by ABC.
All 181?
Yeah, 181. Although, you know, well, I don't have that 25 diary, but 1925 diary, but it really kind of looks like it's 1,810, but really I think the figure I've heard is 181, so I'll go with that. Here's an interesting one. I love this one. February 15th, messages read from Second Order of Cardiff, subject of which was justice tempered with mercy. I've looked at that diary and cannot read what that word is. but it looks like it's Cardif. Where did that come from? I have no idea what that would be, so that's something that Dad heard. Oh, okay, March 29th of 1925, I guess Dr. read the Machiavellian message to the group. So again, he's Machiavellian. And again, it was repeated on December 13th. Oh, and here's when Dad first mentions that date of February 11th, 1924. That was on December 13th, 1925. So almost 2 years later, that February 11th, 24 date gets into Dad's diary. And well, anyway, over the series of years, over the years, I won't bother getting into all these paper subjects, but let me see. Oh, here we go. November 20th, 1927, Lucy Rowe, now Mrs. Gates. So, yeah, right. Well, let me tell you something about my dad. He was a railway mail clerk. Back in the days when they had mail cars on the trains, and his run would be from Chicago to Pittsburgh and back. And until 1927, he lived here in Chicago. But then sometime in the fall of 27, he left Chicago and moved to a little town called Deshler, Ohio, which is right on the main line of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. So what he would do is get on the train in Deshler, come to Chicago, start 2 runs to Pittsburgh and back, and then head back to Deshler. 1929, he met, while visiting relatives down in Kentucky. Both my parents are born in Kentucky. He met Anna Virginia Womack, and they were married in 1931 and moved to Defiance, Ohio, which is also on the railroad, and the same railroad line. And then my sister Carolyn, whose name you saw all over the video, she was, yeah, I'm giving dates now. She was born in 1932 and I was born in 1939. So, but most of those years that he was not living in Chicago, he could only attend the forum meetings if he happened to be in Chicago at the time. Along about, oh, I know, here it shows, I guess by the 1929, he was able to start reading the papers themselves on other days when he was in town. So there's a lot of mention here of some of the papers that he read. It looks like the first one he read was about Adam and Eve and so forth. Yeah, a lot of stuff there about that. So up until then, and I think Barbara did say that is about the time when printed copies of the papers were available to be read here in the building, not to be carried out or anything. Well, I'll move on to, okay, now I'm going to throw in a new date that I did come across on the fellowship website, February 11th, 1935, a typewritten copy of all of part 4 of the arrangement with the Jesus papers were found. And I questioned that. I didn't think that was right, but didn't you just validate now that oh, because Marion Hughes asked a question about that. Oh, I know, and it credited Bud Kagan, who Marion probably knew, and I know JJ knew. Maybe some of you knew him too. I met him a few years ago. He always claimed he was a good friend of Bill Sadler, although your aunt, Pat Mondale, said they really weren't as close as Bud liked to make it out. But anyway, I guess he finally settled in Hawaii, so that's probably how Marion got to know him. Well, I assume she knew him. But anyway, his name is credited for that source. So is there any validity to that date? I don't really know. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, what we're looking for is oral or written history. And at the moment, I would have to double check. But what I do know that everyone validates, and what I was mentioning earlier, just to be clear, in Marion's question, is that those papers did come all at once, and they did read them in sequence. They were ready for more papers, so they just kept reading those papers when they came. And that date makes sense. I just don't have a good citation for it yet. Maybe we can get it.
Yeah.
But sometimes all you have is one, but we like to look for as many sources to cite as possible for credibility. But the date itself makes sense in terms of the other documents that we have. In other words, they were able to read the Part 4 papers, but they did come all at once. Now, what we don't know is all the details.
Yeah.
We know they were presented all at once. Were they all typewritten? Were they all in handwriting? I don't know that we have good citations for that kind of detail.
Yeah.
But the date makes sense.
Well, as I say, I had not heard that specific date before, and I wasn't initially going to include it here, but it's there for what you want to take of it. But the next date I'll mention is February 11th, 2 BC. What's that doing there? Well, because it does appear in Part 4 as the date that, what happened?
Thought adjuster
What about a thought adjuster?
to Jesus, right?
Yeah, right, gotcha. Jesus received his thought adjuster on that date. Okay, now, I don't know whether Mike McIsaac is on, but he did a 98-minute video interview of me. And I said, boy, I really have some problems with that date of February 11th showing up in the Urantia book after these other February 11th dates. But I was talking to Barbara during the break, and I don't know, you sort of intimated that maybe the Contact Commission already knew that Jesus received his thought adjuster long before Part 4 showed up. So that's interesting. I might be willing to accept that. So maybe I don't feel as uncomfortable with February 11th, 2 BC anymore as I was. I don't know. Let's see, I haven't been struck by lightning, so I guess I don't care. The last two February 11th dates I'll mention. I also found on the fellowship website, and they both appear in a message purportedly received by the Contact Commission on November 22nd, 1951, from the, quote, personal regent of the acting planetary prince of Urantia, end quote. And one date is February 11th, 1953. For 500 years from this date, the overall welfare and direction of the Urantia book is placed in the hands of the Seraphim of Progress. I don't think I've ever heard that before. I mean, for that specific date. Have you heard that?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, we have a different validated copy of that communication
Okay.
from Tom Kendall's files, yes.
Oh, yes, Tom Kendall. That's my brother-in-law. And then February 11th, 1954. This is from that same purported message. I mean, I'm using words that do appear on the fellowship website, so you're welcome to accept them or not. But in the absence of midway or intervention after this date, the trustees of Urantia Foundation shall proceed in accordance with their own judgment. So that essentially has to do with if the trustees haven't heard anything more from, I guess, the revelators by the date of February 11th, 1954, they can proceed with printing the Urantia book, which did happen on October 12th, 1955. I'll throw in one more February 11th date. It has more personal meaning to me. On February 11th, 1989, at the Dobson Ranch Branch Library of Mesa Public Library in Arizona, a group of Arizona readers got together and filled out an application to become a Society of Urantia Brotherhood. And I was one of the signees of that. So, and I realized at the time, oh, this is happening on February 11th. So how about that?
You
But
didn't plan it?
no, it really was just I'm sure I had nothing to do with the choosing of the date, of that date. So anyway, so this is my dad died in 1959, and this is how big the books that he was using were then. Still not very big. I started keeping a diary myself in 1957 when I was a senior in high school, and I used this size for the first 2 years, 57 and 58, and then in 59 I just went to regular 8.5 by 11 pages in handwriting. I maintained a diary up through early in my library career, and then actually most of my years as librarian have gone unrecorded, so I don't know who's going to be there to record my great contributions to librarianship. But in 2001, just as I was about to retire from Scottsdale Public Library, I resumed my diary. My diary, and this time I was doing it online on the computer. So anyway, I'm going to finish by reading my own story here. Saskia commissioned me to contribute to the latest edition of How I Found the Urantia book. So if you don't mind me, I think I'll share this because it's not too long. In the young mind of this mortal of Urantia, that being the name of our world, while growing up in Chicago in the 1940s and 50s, there existed great confusion respecting what and where the forum was that my dad was going to on Sunday afternoons. Where was I inspired to write that?
Brilliant.
I don't know where that came from. For a long while, I wondered if it was the forum cafeteria on Madison Street in the Chicago Loop. Frequently, whenever my family would make excursions downtown, we would eat there. In recent years, I mentioned it to my sister Carolyn. She thought Dad deliberately chose that place because of its name. I'm sure there are some people here in this room who remember the Forum Cafeteria. A few. Did you know it at all? Oh, I don't. I read once, it closed a few years ago. In fact, I think it burned down or something, but it was on Madison Street in the Loop. And I read it was the largest eating place in Chicago. Mm-hmm. So by the time Carolyn joined the forum in late 1951, I knew it was not an eating place in the Loop, but some kind of a meeting on Diversity Parkway on the city's north side. Soon afterward, I began hearing the word Urantia at dinner conversations. Eventually, I learned that this was the name of our planet from the perspective of celestial beings. I rather liked that idea, as by then I already knew that Earth meant world or planet. And I thought that if we were only one of many inhabited worlds in the universe, certainly we had a more distinguished name. And how had I come to believe that there were other inhabited worlds? Because Dad had told me so. Only later did I realize that for years he had been implanting in me ideas from the Urantia papers. Sometime in the spring of 1952, Carolyn began working as a receptionist for Dr. William S. Sadler, the psychiatrist whose office was in the same building where the forum meetings took place. This building! I understood that he had some kind of connection with the forum, but I wasn't sure what. Before the end of the year, Carolyn brought her fiance, Tom Kendall, into the forum. By this time, my mom, who had never shown much interest in the group, began to think, well, if the forum is good enough for my future son-in-law, there must be something to it. She became a member sometime in the spring of '53. Dad was secretly pleased, as Mom had been a long-time holdout. With the household now just consisting of Mom, Dad, and me, I began hearing more about the Urantia papers and started becoming intrigued. It must have been that summer of '53 that I too expressed an interest in joining the forum. However, as I was about to begin high school, Dr. Sadler thought it best that I wait a year. And so it was that on June 30th, 1954, shortly after my 15th birthday, I had my interview with Dr. Sadler. Dad and Carolyn sat in with me, and it was in room downstairs, I guess the room down here. Okay, let's see. I can no longer remember everything that Dad might have told me, but I know he mentioned the visits he would make with Howard Thurston, the magician, to expose fake mediums. And I did clarify that my friend Jesse Thurston there, his dad Chuck, and his sister Angie, no, as far as they know, are no relations to Howard Thurston, the magician. Of course, he told me about the longtime patient he'd had who seemed to be a conduit for celestial beings. I had already heard about him from Dad and Carolyn. What else he might have told me that night, I cannot separate with certainty from stories I have subsequently heard over the years. I missed only 2 meetings that entire year of 53, 54. The meeting started at 3 o'clock and ran until 5, with a break about halfway through. And I was here in this room. I don't know whether there were really very many photographs of the setup, but the speaker always was up here, and there were rows. And I don't know how many people could sit in here. But,
70.
Sorry?
70?
With that room open.
Oh, well, I don't ever really recall an overflow except the time that Meredith Sprunger showed up in May of 1957, and boy, the room was really crowded then. Let's see. Because the book had not yet been published, the format for the weekly meetings was for Bill Sadler to read the paper aloud. Bill, as you understand, is William Jr., but we always knew him as Bill. Doctor, we just called him Doctor. And only after the reading were any questions allowed. Bill had an excellent speaking voice and was a very good reader. If he was ever absent, either his father or Christy, Emma Christensen, would be the reader. That first year, the forum was in Park 1. Here I was, a 15-year-old mingling with old people, folks in their 50s, 60s, 70s, because I'm in my 80s, I know, and listening to the hardest part of the Urantia papers. I'm sure I comprehended very little, but I felt it was my duty to attend and get what I could out of the meetings. On my own, I was reading part 3 of the papers. In order to do that, I accompanied my parents on Wednesday evenings, and Mom and I sat in the room on the first floor and read there. If Dad was with us that evening, he would be upstairs in the forum attending the 70, the advanced study group that started in 1939. I had thought that my dad was one of the original 70, but I see now that he really wasn't able to get into it until some years after he moved back to Chicago, which was 1943. I don't think I mentioned that. This continued to be the routine until October 12th, 1955, when the Urantia book was published. When Dad came home that night from the 70 with the copies he had ordered, he brought me my own copy, which I have to this day. In it, I inscribed, published and given to me on the 12th day of October of the year commonly known as 1955 AD.
Wow.
Sounds a little pretentious, doesn't it? In my adolescent fervor, I guess I thought that once the teachings of the Urantia book became universal, the calendar would change. Perhaps I thought 7 BC would become year 1. So I don't know. Any questions? Yes.
Do you know the number of the paper for the February 11 attribution, Jesus Star Adjuster? What's the paper?
Who's the adjuster?
Yeah.
Well, it's can't be.
I don't have, well, it'd be early infancy,
Yeah.
early childhood of Jesus. So I don't know the paper number offhand, but
What?
It would be his 5th year, but I don't know what paper that is.
5th year, okay.
are there any questions from the Zoomers? Okay, let's see, question in the back. What's your name?
Rich.
Me? Chris, yes, sorry.
So
One without name and number, that's what you are.
I had heard that some of your father's diaries had been whited out, and then later the ink got through the whiteout? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, he was, I don't remember when it was that he was directed to cross out all of his reverends. Here, let me look at December 14th. It is hard to read, but he didn't really do a very good job of whiting out. I can read it. Wonderful revelations from Machiavelli and ABC were read by the doctor. So maybe Carolyn probably used some stuff on it to help bring it back. Either that or he was using invisible ink and it just came up. But it is true, he did white things out, at least prior to the publication. But I think there was a, Rich, did you have your hand up?
Oh, I just wondered how many decades did the, play on words or connection to ordination of the 70 occur with the ordination, with 70 Formites? I guess I'm being obtuse. Was there ever any connection made?
It was a coincidence.
I know it was a
You're wondering about the
coincidence,
name?
right?
My understanding is a coincidence. There happened to be just 70 people there.
Just a coincidence.
Yeah, and
Okay.
they realized, the 70 that Jesus had as a group. And it's, we'll call ourselves the 70s, the 70. Did I see a question over here? Mark?
Is there any merit, or is it published what the questions, the 181 questions were? Are they published somewhere?
I don't think so. And I would love to know, I would love to know
Curious about that.
what questions my dad might have submitted. So, no, I guess those have not shown up.
Okay.
Ken?
Yeah, the citation for February 11th, 2 BC is in paper 123, section 2, paragraph 1, or on page 1357. Page 1357, the 5th paragraph.
In his 5th year.
Yeah, right.
Aye.
Yeah. Are there any other questions from anybody on Zoom or anything?
No hands raised, no questions in the chat.
Okay.
Oh,
I recognize a
somebody
few of
asked what's
my
ADC.
buddies up there and everything, but Mark, did you have another question?
Well, I hear all the time from different people, who wrote the book? All the time, everybody wants to know that. So all this is available on YouTube and on the Urantia Foundation website and your website, the fellowship website, are very helpful resources. But everybody gets involved in this who, and I think it involves authority.
Mm-hmm.
And
Acceptance of authority.
I would take counsel from people how to handle this word authority with people, because it's a big topic with a lot of people. And when somebody told me one time, well, it's multiple authorship, and that usually drops the question. So anybody's got any suggestions on this authority and who wrote the book, I would be glad to hear counsel on that anytime, not necessarily here.
Yeah. Celestial authors. I really had no trouble accepting that as a teenager. Sounded good to me.
I always say the celestial beings that run our universe, that guide the universe, and they go, huh? And also that God has 7 super universes and 700,000, 100,000 universes in a super universe, and 700,000, and they really go back. Their eyes really go back.
Say 700,000 Jesuses, and that will upset a few people. Ken?
On the chat, Marianne Hughes responded that Julia Fenderson told me she asked the questions about prayer. So the questions about prayer got asked from the forum to the revelatory.
Oh, Julia asked that. Oh, that's nice. Yeah. No, I wonder as I say, I wonder what my dad asked, and I've never heard, so I don't
He
know.
probably asked about bad kids.
Yeah.
Might have asked about the blonde.
You
No,
got
wait a minute.
a hand
No.
raised, a hand raised from Richard Jernigan on.
Well, I was just gonna say, Dad was not a parent yet. So anyway, haha, I should, okay.
Richard Jernigan has a question.
Yeah, thank you. And it's a great presentation, Larry. I love hearing this stuff. As far as the who wrote it, my typical statement is, well, nobody knows who wrote it. Nobody has ever claimed to have written it, and no one has done the investigative work to verify human authorship. So that's
Thank you.
my answer.
Thanks. That's a good answer.
Good to see you, Richard.
Yeah, likewise.
Oh, there's a question from Jim Watkins.
Okay.
Is there a question from Jim Watkins?
Yeah, it just came up in the chat.
Or was it a comment?
Oh, it's in the chat. Question.
I can ask it if you want me to.
Yes, please do.
The question is, did the revelators ever warn us about the lack of enthusiasm that we might experience early on and not to be dissuaded by that?
That's a good question. I don't know.
What lack of enthusiasm?
I guess popular acceptance, whatever, popularity. It's a tough sell in today's age because of the insecurity or maybe people today are very, anything new will scare them sometimes. What? People today are more skeptical, I guess, where we warned about that skepticism early on.
I don't think it would be exactly like that, but there is another communication from the regent that Larry mentioned, who is Norson, Norson.
Oh, okay.
And
I've heard the name, but it's not,
Yes.
it doesn't, it's
And
not in the book at all.
this came when the newly formed Court of Urantia had issued the directives on how to publish the book that Larry referred to in his dad's diary. And many of you have heard this. The main communication, I think, that gave the forum and others, including now, some understanding of the evolutionary nature of this. It isn't that they were warned that people would be skeptical, but they were told that this revelation, and it was in the video, was being given before its worldwide mission. And you would see a lot of letters from Christie or Dr. Sadler explaining that to people, that when you don't see much interest, that's part of it, that this is the early stage of a 1,000-year process. And the book is being given to make ready for the day when more people will be interested and ready to read it. So those are the ways it was talked about, but I think the forum was shocked even so at the lack of interest in those earliest days. What I call the first wave of readers really started toward the late 60s and early 70s and into the 70s up including now. That's what I call the first wave. It was big. I mean, there were lots of great news coming in from Australia. I was here when that news came in, and Julia went to visit Australia. I mean, we were all pretty excited, even in the 70s, to, like, Sue Snyder's father was a representative in New York, and he asked Christy, what other Urantia book readers do we have in New York City? And she said, we don't have any, just 2 or 3. Just, so it was slow, and I think that was a concern, but they had pretty much told us the time frame is long range, 1,000 years. That's in the text of the book as well. And it's evolutionary.
What's the story about Vern Benham Grimsley and how he influenced this group?
Well, what I would say is, it is part of the 100 years, but we're really focusing more on the early day forum history. And we could address that question later in the day if you want to, but it was controversial, of course, and many Urantia book readers had many different views of what Vern experienced in 1983.
To keep on schedule, we need to conclude, but we had one hand still up and 2 people that, which is James Land and Leah Naylor. And we had 2 people, Marion Hughes and Bennett Rutenberger, raise their hand and then lower them. If any of those 3 people want to be the final Joey, you had your
Yeah,
hand up?
very short question.
Okay, and Joey has his hand up. So in that sequence, James or Leah?
Yeah, thank you. I happen to have a document from the San Francisco study group. Stephen Zent, actually, who's here today, brought it. And I saved it all these years. It's Birth of a Revelation, the story of the Urantia Papers, Mark Kulicki, 1992. This document differs slightly from the one that's available on the foundation website. I'm wondering if I'm the only one who's noticed that or if that's common knowledge.
I've got a copy of that, but because I'm not familiar with what's on the website, or foundation website?
Correct. It differs slightly in the wording from the one on the foundation website. I happen to have a paper copy of it.
Oh, I'm so glad you have it. This is Barbara. I have all of Mark's papers related to the development of Birth of a Revelation, including his draft that wasn't published. So I'll have to check those things for you, but Mark did several editions. So sometimes the change in wording has to do with his first published pamphlet in pamphlet form and what came out in the second and third editions that he did. So if there are some changes in wording, it might be due to that, but I'd have to check his records to tell you.
Joey had a quick question.
Yes, at the beginning of the video, Ken, that you started, I saw, instead of 3 circles, I saw 5. Can someone explain why there was 5 at the beginning of the video and not the traditional 3?
It was 3. It's just the artist's depiction of it. So we could look at it again.
Yeah, there was 5.
Wow. It's 3.
I saw 5. I saw 5. I don't have perfect vision, but I think I did see 5.
So, thank you. There's no further questions. Marion Hughes raised her hand again. That will need to be the final question because we do need to break for lunch to stay on schedule.
One quick thing then, Barbara, you pretty much answered exactly what I would have said, except that the book was given early to get translations out there. It was given before its time to find people of means, and I think they use that word, financial means, that would be able to start getting the book translated into the many different tongues of the planet so that it didn't just become English centric or just a United States trip. So just wanted to add that.
Yeah.
Yes, thanks for that addition. It said exactly that.
And I'll finish by just reminding everyone that Dr. Sadler here is one of the presenters this afternoon at 2:45. So if any of you folks want to see a 4th generation Sadler, and we're rooting for the 5th generation, so we're going to
Thank you.
Thank you.